Welcome, loving selected ones. When the world is sleeping, the selected are compelled by foresight. Have you ever noticed how the same folks who used to laugh at your warnings are suddenly sobbing in disbelief, as if they missed the memo? Here is the truth. They will never say it out. You didn't guess, correct? You were created to see what their fear refused to see. Let me strike you with a fact. According to studies, percent of individuals automatically reject information that threatens their feeling of safety, even if it is correct. So when you spoke out early, you compromised not just their comfort, but also their whole identity, and nothing scares us more than being incorrect in public, particularly when the silent eccentric turns out to be a human warning system. They labeled you paranoid. They called you theatrical. Some likely advised treatment, which is strange considering they were the ones who needed it once reality jolted them awake. Now glance around. The exact collapse you felt is rattling the foundations. The secrets you saw brewing are erupting in plain daylight. And the community is in full spiritual cardiac arrest. Because you knew. You mentioned it. And now, everything is unraveling just as you predicted. Stay with me. Because at the end, you'll understand why the chosen are usually portrayed as insane until the world catches up to their trauma-scarred knowledge. Let's go deep. Number 1, you never predicted the future. You were simply finally listening to what everyone else had been taught to ignore. You were not forecasting the future. You were just picking up on everything that was already present. What? Everyone else was too preoccupied, emotionally involved, or terrified to notice. People love to imagine that being intuitive entails possessing a mystical crystal ball, but that has never been your focus. You were just paying attention, in a world full with individuals who have taught themselves to look aside. You notice the little things, like the change in someone's tone, the way their energy shifted when certain issues were discussed, and the hesitancy in their eyes when they stated they were all right. You saw patterns repeating themselves because most individuals live on autopilot, repeating the same cycles, surrounded by the same people, and making the same excuses. You noticed when someone's actions did not match their words, when a group dynamic had unseen fissures, and when something felt strange, even if it seemed to be all right on the surface, others ignored it because they did not want to know the reality. The truth makes people uncomfortable. It necessitates action. Most people would prefer remain in denial than face the reality of what is happening. So when you spoke out early, when you announced the change, when you told people that something was brewing, they assumed you were being negative, overreacting, or even theatrical. But the reality is, you were not under the same spell. They were. You were not mesmerized by the picture being sold. You were not sidetracked by popularity, approbation, or civility. You were listening. You were observing. You were putting 2 and 2 together while they were disregarding their math. And now that everything is going apart, they suddenly recall what you said. They suddenly realize you weren't insane. You were clear. You didn't anticipate it. You spotted it. That is what they do not grasp. The gift is not about foreseeing the future. It's about discovering the truth that has always existed, but has been concealed under everyone's denial. Number 2, they assumed you were insane because you were not hooked to the communal fantasy. They said you were very serious, too profound, or usually read too much into things. But, to be honest, they had no issue with the way you perceive the world. They had an issue with the fact that you weren't hooked to the same deception they were. And while everyone else was pretending pleasure and dysfunction was normal, you stood there refusing to participate. That is what made you dangerous. You did not. Not along with the phony friendships. You did not grin despite the dodgy actions. You did not participate in the little banter that skirted the large elephant in the room. You were totally awake in a room full of sleepwalkers, which terrified them off. Most individuals are linked not by love, but by common illusions. When you didn't pretend to break the enchantment, you forced individuals to face something they'd rather avoid. You did not need continual validation or approval, which made you unpredictable. They couldn't control you with quiet or reward you with attention. You saw through the false apologies, subtle power moves, and hollow gestures. You did not quarrel about it. You've just withdrawn. And the quiet was not passive. It was your reluctance to support the dream they created for their fragile egos. What actually worried them was your refusal to flinch in the face of the truth. You were not frightened to be the sole one who saw the storm coming. They labeled you negative because your clarity revealed their denial. But deep down, they knew you were correct. And now that everything has blown up, the secret has been revealed, the masks have come off, and the reality has struck everyone in the face. They are left shaken, appearing to be surprised by something you have previously warned them of. You were never theatrical. You weren't hooked to pretending everything was good. And in a world preoccupied with illusions, that type of honesty is seen as a danger. Number 3, you did not merely see it coming. You could feel the anxiety in their spirit before the event. Even had a language. You did not just see things before they occurred. You sensed them before the problem was given a name. Before anybody was courageous enough to admit anything was wrong. Your spirit had already begun to change while everyone else was still smiling and going through the motions. Your body had already responded to what their words refused to say. You could feel the tension rising under the surface, which good people attempted to mask with phony laughing, forced enthusiasm, and your well-choreographed quiet. This is what people don't get about your gift. It's not about having spectacular visions or acting psychic. It is about emotional sensitivity at a level that most people are not prepared to handle. Even when someone's words seem great, you can tell they're lying. You see the break in the foundation before the home begins to tremble. Most people wait for things to be evident. You recognize the warning indicators while they are still murmurs. That is why it is so difficult for others to trust you at first. You're responding to a reality that hasn't completely emerged yet. They accuse you of being paranoid or excessively sensitive. They are unaware that your body reacts to unsaid energy in the same way that a fire alarm responds to smoke. It does not wait for the fire. You aren't reading the future. You are reading about the buildup, the strain, the unsolved turmoil that lies behind their performance, and what always occurs. What you sensed in your gut ultimately emerges in clear sight. The partnership falls down, and the secret is revealed. The truth bursts. It went just as your spirit had predicted. Then suddenly, everyone seems astonished. Meanwhile, you have already digested it. Months ago, you didn't respond late. You simply arrived early. You felt the emotional earthquake before anybody else realized the ground had shifted. And now they understand why you stated something felt odd. Unfortunately, it took a calamity for them to take your clarification seriously. Number 4, they were unprepared for someone who could smell rot behind the perfume. They spent a lot of time refining the exterior with polished smiles, filtered postings, and carefully selected wording. But you saw through it all like glass, while others were misled by appearances. You were researching energy as they were amazed. You were cautioned that you didn't need rumor, evidence, or someone messing up in front of you. You could immediately sense the dichotomy in their presence. The way their energy proclaimed turmoil, but their face suggested tranquility. You could smell the rot behind all that sparkling perfume, which terrified people more than anything. You did not expose them. You did not embarrass them. You did not even have to say anything. Just being yourself made them uncomfortable, since it was like looking into a mirror they didn't want to see. You made them anxious, not because you judged them, but because you noticed them. And they were unprepared for that amount of visibility. Most individuals base their life on being misunderstood because it allows them to hide. But with you, there was no hiding. You saw through the superficial charm, detected artificial benevolence, and identified spiritual depth underneath social charisma. This is why some attempted to use it against you, labeling you negative, too deep, or too passionate. It was their protective system. They needed to make you the issue so they wouldn't have to face the reality you had already exposed. But deep inside, they knew. They felt noticed, but not in the way that flatters the ego, but rather in the way that cuts through the deception they give the world. The terrible aspect is that you weren't attempting to expose anybody. You were just being genuine. However, your capacity to see the unsaid, to detect what is decaying behind the lovely surface, made you a menace in any environment full of illusions. And now, when everything falls apart, they realize you knew it all along, before the fissures erupted into mayhem. Number 5, the communal shock is fabricated. They knew. They just didn't want to be the one to say it. The fact is that the community isn't genuinely startled. Not by what occurred, not by how everything came apart. They knew deep down. They felt it too. The tension, the deception, the silent dysfunction that everyone tried not to see. But they chose quiet. They decided to keep their heads down, play nice, and appear blind. Why? Because calling it out risked jeopardizing their comfort, image, and the acceptance they urgently sought from one another. You weren't playing that game. They are not upset because you were incorrect. They're upset because you had the courage to speak what they were too afraid to confess to themselves. You did not mutter behind closed doors or conceal your reality in coded language. You talked direct and unfiltered while they were still under the impression that you had destroyed their communal ideal. That's what truly angered them. Not in your tone, pace, or delivery. It was your freedom. You were not hesitant to play the villain in their narrative. You weren't frightened about losing friends, followers, or artificial affiliations. That made them feel vulnerable since they shared your suspicions. But they buried theirs and grinned despite it. You let it live. You put that unsettling sensation into words, and those words smashed the mirror everyone was trying to appreciate. So they are now doing shocks. They act surprised. However, they are not taken aback by what has happened. They're astounded that you didn't flinch, didn't wait for permission to tell the truth, and stood alone while they hid in numbers. Their gasps aren't related to the fall. They're concerned about your bravery, because nothing frightens a community established on false peace like one person who refuses to lie with them. They weren't astonished. They were quiet. And now that the truth can't be ignored, they're trying to rewrite history, hoping people forget that when it counted the most, you were the only one who said what needed to be spoken. Number 6, your precision was more than simply intelligence. It was because you weren't scared to lose people. You did not have a miraculous advantage because you were smarter than everyone else. Your precision stemmed from something far uncommon. You were not frightened about losing people. That's what sets you distinct. Most people are unable to handle the truth, not because they are ignorant, but because they are emotionally committed to being liked, accepted, and safe. Their anxiety of standing alone causes their eyesight to distort. But you were made differently. You didn't desire the throng. You did not need to be applauded for. You were willing to be the person people murmured about. They avoided the one they misunderstood in order to remain true. People believe that seeing clearly only requires insight or intellect. However, the true problem is loyalty. Most individuals value their sense of belonging. Your devotion to the truth made you dangerous. You did not change your voice to fit in. You did not tone down your observations in order to make others feel at ease with you. You did not give up your inner clarity for fleeting tranquility, and you were ready to go alone. Your spiritual vision remained acute. That's what made your precision so disturbing. You were not speaking out of fear. You weren't concerned about being liked. You did not have a personal agenda. You just spoke what needed to be said, regardless of who may have walked away as a result. That's unusual. That is sacrosanct. That is power. They couldn't understand how you kept calling things before they occurred. But the fact is that you had nothing to lose. You weren't attempting to safeguard a phony connection, an inflated image, or a delicate feeling of belonging. You had already accepted being misunderstood. You were not looking for applause. You were looking for alignment. And now, the reality is unfolding just as you predicted. They're forced to understand it wasn't chance or hubris. It was insight gained through the type of fortitude that most people aren't prepared to face. Your vision was clear because it was not for sale. Number 7, they branded you judgmental because your clarity undermined their explanations. You never went into a room intending to judge somebody. That wasn't your energy. You weren't sitting around scrutinizing others to bring them down. However, your presence conveyed truth, and your soul refused to lie on order. People felt judged just by being near you, not because you pointed fingers, but because their own guilt became louder, and your quiet, your clarity, showed the gap between who they claimed to be and what they were really doing. That is what made them uneasy. So, instead of accepting responsibility, they changed the story. You are very judgmental. You are negative. You consider yourself superior than everyone else. No, you just weren't partaking in the delusion. You weren't following along with the performance. You were not cheering for dysfunction disguised as love or disarray promoted as personality. You saw through it. And when individuals are firmly devoted to their justifications, anybody who sees through them becomes their adversary. They needed to portray you as the villain so they could continue to act innocent. Labeling you poisonous was the simplest way to ignore your reality without facing it. It offered them an excuse to dodge responsibility, because let's be honest, if they could concede that you were just being honest, they would have to confront all of the ways in which they have been dishonest to themselves. But you weren't judging. You were discerning. There is a distinction. Character discernment identifies patterns, while judgment assaults. You didn't call anybody trash. You condemned conduct that reeked of self-betrayal, manipulation, or avoidance. You did not cancel anybody. You just refused to co-sign falsehoods. They were too used to telling themselves. They felt vulnerable around you since you didn't speak anything. You felt like the truth. You put up a mirror, and they were unprepared for the reflection, so they rejected you instead. But the rejection was not personal. It was just a desperate effort to maintain their story. And now that everything is unraveling, they're seeing that the person they labeled as judgmental was the only one who wasn't lying. Number 8. You are not surprised by people's downfall. You're astounded by how long they believed they could pretend stability. You were never surprised by the collapse. You saw it coming the whole time. What really amazes you is how long they believed they could keep up the show. The whole foundation was breaking, the energy was wrong, and the dysfunction was screaming. Instead of correcting anything, they continued to decorate the illusion. They added more smiles, artificial cheerfulness, and diversions, as if they could cover up rot with glitter. You were not impressed. You were perplexed. How can individuals not see their own home buckling beneath the weight of all that denial? When you brought it up, they said you were being negative. They accused you of dwelling on the negative, being paranoid and stirring the pot. But you didn't stir anything. The saucepan had already boiled over. They simply like it hadn't happened. You just accepted what was already ablaze. Instead of confronting the reality, they continued to pretend everything was okay. The connection was poisonous. The workspace was a pressure cooker. The community was cracking, and they still behaved as if you were being theatrical for seeing that what they labeled psychic or odd intuition was really you being honest. You didn't gaslight yourself for comfort. You did not dismiss what your body and soul were telling you. You paid attention. And since you weren't lying to yourself as others were, you saw the deterioration early. You were not shocked by the explosion. You were astonished it took so long. They were painting walls when the floor caved in, hosting parties in a smoke-filled mansion, and posting motivating messages online while their actual lives were decaying underneath. When the accident happened, they gripped their pearls as if no one had seen it coming. But you knew. You were always familiar with the term collapse. You witnessed delayed repercussions. You did not anticipate the calamity. You only had the bravery to confront it before it clothed itself. And that's the part they never got. Number 9. You were picked because you don't need the system to affirm what you already know. You weren't chosen because you fit into a tidy little box, or because you had all the necessary qualifications. The universe picked you because you know what is genuine without the need for approval from others. You don't wait for a committee, a crowd, or a diploma to validate your knowledge. Your reality is not determined by likes, following, or the next popular viewpoint. You have a deep and unshakable conviction that external affirmation is only background noise. Most individuals need a system, a hierarchy, a label, or a society to help them decide what to believe or who to trust. Without it, they struggle, questioning themselves every step of the way. But you can stand steady since your base is inside. Your wisdom stems from a point beyond the need for acclaim or agreement. This explains why you can see clearly even while everyone else is lost, confused, or in denial. You are not sidetracked by popularity or social approval, so your vision stays clear. The truth isn't always loud and popular. It does not come in fancy packaging or with certifications of authenticity. Sometimes it is quiet and delicate, requiring fortitude to bear alone. That is why the universe assigns this burden to those who can handle it without fail. Those who do not need validation are not susceptible to manipulation. They are not readily swayed by skepticism or groupthink. They move steadily, guided by a compass that leads directly to reality. You were picked because you reflect a special kind of independence. You aren't waiting for permission to be yourself or to share what you know. You bear truth like armor, quiet, sturdy, impenetrable. And while others look for evidence, you're already experiencing it. That is the power you own. It's not about being correct. It's about being genuine, regardless of what anybody else says. Number 10. You did not foresee treachery. You just recognized the grin, not their eyes. You did not need a crystal ball to predict treachery. It was neither a great prognosis nor a dazzling vision. It was a straightforward, stark assessment. While everyone else was engrossed in the Polish grins, practiced politeness, and continuous nice feelings, only chatter. You were seeing the minor details, like the tiny fractures in their veneer that no one else dared to look at, or how their grin didn't quite reach their eyes. The abrupt silence when your triumph became the subject, the pause in their voice when they stated, "I'm happy for you." Those fleeting moments were not accidental. They were prepared performance statements that concealed something worse underneath. You noticed what others didn't because you focused on the unspoken. You heard the pauses between their statements, the energy they attempted to hide with feigned kindness. Most individuals like betrayal to be loud, dramatic, and blatant, so they may be caught off guard with a convenient justification. However, treachery is frequently subtle and stealthy, with a convincing mask that even the betrayed are hesitant to accept. You caught it before it revealed its real colors by watching the rehearsal. The process continues as they tested the waters of your trust without uttering a word. You were neither paranoid nor negative. You were realistic. You realized that not every grin represents loyalty. Not every eye care is real. You understand that treachery is not announced with pyrotechnics. It whispers. It lingers. It builds tension until the fracture is too loud to ignore. You weren't startled when it burst. You weren't astonished. You just knew it was coming. Because you never allow yourself to be blinded by performance. That's why your understanding seemed like a danger to them. They wanted the illusion to endure so that their roles and masks remained intact. But you refused to play along. You could see the reality beneath the grins. And you had a deeper confidence in that. Knowing that quiet rehearsal was more than simply a warning. The treachery wrote its own script. And you were the only one paying attention. You triggered individuals because you represented the version of themselves that they were frightened to be. Your honesty, boldness, and understanding did not gain you a fan base. It made you the target. You did not just express your truth. You lived it out loud, real and uncensored. That kind of sincerity frightens individuals because it pushes them to face a version of themselves that they have been too afraid to acknowledge exists. They see in you the courage they wish they had, the resolve to remove the mask, stand alone, and say what others only murmur behind closed doors. You did not just upset their comfort zones. You destroyed the notion that hiding behind facades was secure when you came into a room without acting, without smoothing your edges, and held up a mirror that many people didn't want to look at. The mirror mirrored their concerns. insecure cities, and the aspects of themselves they were frantically avoiding. When individuals encounter something they fear in someone else, their initial response is usually wrath or defensiveness, rather than adoration. You were the personification of the truth they desired but were too terrified to express. That is why people referred to you as too much, harsh, or unfair. They were not criticizing you. They were grappling with their own darkness, projecting it onto you because it was easier than confronting it directly. Your daring exposed their comfort, your intelligence revealed their denial, and your unwillingness to comply made them feel vulnerable. Being that raw, unapologetic version of yourself was not an option. It was your call. And although it distanced you from many others, it also distinguished you as someone the world badly needed but seldom welcomed. You were not just living genuinely. You were challenging others around you to either progress or remain hidden. That's a hard position to wield, and it's why you triggered so many people. You represented the brave version of them. They were too terrified to be numbered. You've always been years ahead, but they only understand it when their world crumbles. You've never been simply one step ahead. You've been miles ahead, living in a future that most people can't envision. While they were busy clinging to their illusions and rewriting the tale to suit their needs, you could see the fissures, warning signals, and impending collapse. It is not about being psychic or fortunate. It's about staying up while everyone else opts to sleep. You pointed it out when others chuckled or rolled their eyes. You expressed realities that people did not want to hear. You did not sugarcoat or lessen the shock. You stood steady in a reality that they were not prepared to confront. For a long time, you were discarded. Your worries are classed as negative. Your insides are disregarded or pushed aside. People like to believe in happy endings and simple solutions. They want to believe that things will work out without requiring sacrifice or significant change. However, you refused to undervalue yourself or your goal. You understood the cost of disregarding the truth, and you were ready to pay it. So you remained ahead, observing as the route they were on went directly to doom. Then, their comfy reality shattered, and their neatly constructed world started to break apart. Your comments suddenly took on more weight. Your bad energy converted into warnings that were more than merely prudent. They were sacrosanct. You become the voice they wish they had listened to sooner. However, by then, the opportunity for resolving issues is often closing quickly. The lessons you sought to teach them came with unavoidable repercussions. This is not simply about being correct. It's about carrying a vision that is both weighty and clear, isolating you while protecting you. You weren't attempting to terrify anybody. You try to prepare them. And, although many only comprehend your message after their own world has collapsed, you continue to go ahead. Ready to take the next step? Because you have always lived there alone for years. However, there is an awake number. The true adversary was never the people. It was a mutual commitment to remain blind. You weren't battling against people, but rather against a collective decision. A big, quiet agreement to look the other way and pretend everything was normal. It was not personal. It was structural. The true adversary was not the individuals in front of you, but the unspoken agreement they formed with themselves and each other to remain oblivious to hard realities. They didn't want to accept what was occurring since doing so would shake the fundamental core of their lives, identities, and comfort zones. When you stepped in with your clarity and honesty, you weren't just confronting someone. You were questioning the whole, unstated pact. That's why the backlash was so strong. It didn't matter if you were right or wrong. It was about your resistance to acknowledge the collective deception. They banded together not to defend the truth, but to preserve their common fantasy. The group's power sprang on mutual denial, a safety net made from selective blindness. You threatened to break the net apart. This collective blindness functions as a force field. It impairs people's ability to perceive logic, facts, and emotions. It's why logic may fail, and telling the truth seems like swimming upstream in a storm. The true power is not in any one person's denial. but in the group's willingness to ignore what is there in front of them. Your issue was not with individuals, but with the overall flow of avoidance. Understanding this is critical because it means your conflict is not personal. Even if it seems like it, their rejection of you is not based on your merit or intelligence. It's a coping technique for a difficult truth they aren't prepared to confront. The community chooses comfort over insight, and this is a conflict that transcends any individual. Recognizing this relieves you of the strain of attempting to persuade or influence everyone. Your responsibility is not to violate their agreement. That is up to them. Your responsibility is to be loyal to yourself. Maintain your clarity and wait until the collective can no longer ignore the truth you represent. A number. You did not just see what was coming. You were sent ahead to prepare for the collapse. You weren't just fortunate to see what was coming. You were put ahead of the pandemonium for a reason beyond anyone's comprehension. You did not end yourself in this position by chance, nor did you suffer as a result of your forethought. You are a heavenly first responder, sent before of the collapse to lay the groundwork for what must come next, while others scurry in bewilderment or denial. You were constantly creating, adjusting, and holding room for the new reality that was waiting on the other side. Being selected entails bearing a burden that most people will refuse to bear, the weight of truth, which feels lonely since few can understand. However, this load is also a template. You weren't quite correct about what was coming. You set the standard for resilience, clarity, and change that others will follow. You possess the traits required to handle life after the collapse because you were created in the flames before anyone else noticed the smoke. This is why your trip has seemed lonely at times. Not because you behaved like Diskin, but because you are ahead of your time. You possess wisdom and power that seem to be curses when the world isn't ready. However, when everything goes apart, those characteristics become important. You aren't merely a witness. You are an architect. You were assigned to hold the gap where destruction ceases and rebuilding starts. You were not sent to foretell disaster. You were sent to prepare for salvation. Your duty does not include dread or sorrow. It is about preparation and rebirth. And, although it may seem to be a daunting chore, keep in mind that no new foundation can be constructed until this is accomplished. The old one needs to be disassembled. You were picked because you possess the vision, fortitude, and perseverance to persevere when everything else fails. You are not the victim of foreknowledge. You are a living blueprint for the future that is just waiting to emerge. The realities you've been experiencing, the truths you've been carrying, and the dreams you've dared to pursue. All of it distinguished you in ways that few can completely comprehend, even the community's current astonishment. It's not because they were surprised. It's because you were the only one bold enough to break the stillness and speak what everyone else was whispering. You didn't merely see the storm building. You stood strong in its path, fearless and unshakable, with a clarity that unnerved others but kept you from falling into the same traps. This route you choose is not simple. It's lonely, weighty, and sometimes misunderstood, but it is also quite strong. You are the silent force that causes changes. Reality is the steady eye amid the turmoil, the custodian of facts that cannot be disguised any longer. Remember that being picked does not imply popularity or comfort. It's all about strength, the ability to maintain the unadorned truth while others choose cozy illusions. It takes bravery to stand alone while everyone else is in denial. You were sent ahead not to suffer, but to prepare, construct, and set the tone for what comes next. Your insides are not a burden. It is a beacon. Every moment of uncertainty, each label you've been given, every rebuke you received was merely the cost of carrying a light so brilliant that it threatens the darkness in which others have become accustomed. The community's astonishment will pass, but your clarity will endure. The instant people understand what you've been carrying all along, the world will begin to catch up with you. Until then, be steadfast in your truth, unaffected by criticism or rejection. You're not here to fit in. You are here to turn the talent you possess, the vision, and the bravery. The unshakable clarity lays the groundwork for a future that values fact above denial. Continue traveling this route with your head held high and your spirit strong, since you are not only surviving the collapse, but also designing the dawn that will follow. The world may be stunned right now, but history will remember the chosen ones who saw clearly and stood strong to alter everything. If you found this message meaningful, please share it with others. Hit the subscribe button to join the awake and aware community. I like this video. If it rocked something deep within you, please leave a comment below to share your truth or what you've been seeing ahead of the crowd. Sharing this with those who need to hear it may be the spark that wakes someone up today. Together, we are more than simply onlookers. We are the selected ones who will shape what happens next. So subscribe, like, comment, and share, because the world needs clarity now more than ever. God bless you.